This video is brought to you by FS Academy Commander. FS Academy's latest package offers a range of challenging scenarios available within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Your command skills will be put to the test with emergency landings, system malfunctions, hazardous weather and more. The FS Academy series is created and taught by a real-world Airbus A320 captain, so the instruction throughout is both accurate and informed. FS Academy Commander will be available from the InSim marketplace, as well as from many of your favourite vendors. Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Pilot DHC-7. This was an add-on that's been in the works for quite some time, and certainly an aircraft that I was looking forward to seeing within the sim. A 4-engined, rugged, capable turboprop certainly seems like an aircraft that would be a lot of fun within Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we're going to be taking the aircraft on a short flight, putting the -7 through its paces as we go. We're currently on the ground at Maniitsoq in Greenland. We're going to be taking the aircraft up north towards Sisimiut. It is worth noting ahead of time that the add-on is very short on documentation, so it was a little bit tricky trying to figure out how best to operate the -7. However, we will be using real-world checklists throughout the flight, so we should still get a decent feel as to the accuracy of the aircraft. As usual, I'll try my best to point out any noteworthy aspects of the product along the way. As always, I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, then please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. So good morning and welcome to the cockpit of the -7. As you can see, it's a very gloomy day here on the ground at Maniitsoq, and we're going to be making, as I say, a very short run up towards Sisimiut. It's actually our second sector of the day. We departed out of Nuuk earlier on this morning, and we're just making our way northbound along the coast. Despite it being our second sector of the day, we are going to run through the full pre-flight originating checklist. As usual, that's going to allow you to get a good feel for the level of systems depth available on the product. So first things first, the master battery switch can go on. As you can hear there, very nice sounds associated initially with the power up. However, unfortunately, the sounds generally throughout the aircraft are very hit and miss. The AC master and DC masters can both go on. We'll take the left and right battery switches on. Now we'll take the DC external power. We'll close up the bus tie here as well. We should see the left and right battery lights go out, as they do. DC generators are selected off. The flight data recorder is set through to normal. ELT is set through to auto. The panel lighting, as you can see, I've already pretty much cranked up all of the integral lighting within the panel. And the lighting is pretty hit and miss on the aircraft overall. We do also have a dome light available. We'll leave that on for the flight today, just to brighten things up a little bit so that we can see what we're doing. The fire handles are selected in. The fire and smoke warnings will test both systems. As you can see, the lights do work. There's no sounds associated with the test. I'd be a little bit surprised if that's true to life for the -7. We'll say the test has been complete. There do seem to be a lot of missing sounds on the aircraft overall. Windshield wipers are selected off. Windshield heat is set through to warm up. Ice controller, all switching there, selected off. And the pitot static heats are selected off. Battery temperatures are checked. They're both just up within the amber band currently. We can also carry out a battery temperature test, but as you can see, the needles there are very slow to rise. I'd be surprised if that's true to life. So we'll say that the test has been complete. Anti-collision light is selected off. Position lights are selected on. Ignition, we have all 4 ignition systems set through to normal. Fuel quantities are checked. We've got about 1,600 pounds there in each main tank. We'll just carry out a test here as well on the fuel quantity gauges. The auxiliary pumps are selected off. Fuel transfer system is selected off. And all 4 switches set there through to closed. Engine start selector is off. Cabin pressure controller is set through to auto. There does seem to be a bug here as well with the cabin pressurization system. We can't actually select a flight altitude, so we're left guessing in terms of what we need for a cabin altitude. And as you'll see here as well, the needle jumps around over the gauge, so I'm not really sure what we're supposed to set. We'll leave that as is. AC external power is selected off. The inverter selector switch should be on the left bus. That switch is currently inoperative. AC generators are selected off. Engine bleeds are selected off. Cabin temperature controls are set through to auto. Fasten seatbelt signs are selected on. Same there for the no smoking signs. We'll leave the emergency exit light switch off for the time being. As far as the clocks go, they are both set. We've got about 9:05 local currently. The flight taxi switch is set through to taxi. GPWS, we should carry out a system test. That seems to be an operative as well. The switch appears to be down here on the center console. Yaw damper is selected off. The switch is guarded. Flight directors will test. They're both working correctly. We'll take those off again for the time being. Landing and taxi lights are selected off. The PFCS switches are set, lights out. Autopilot system coupling is set through to captain. Nose wheel steering, once again inoperative. The stall and overspeed warnings. Technically we can click the stall warning test, but there doesn't seem to be any associated sounds, any associated animations with that. And the aircraft overspeed test currently inoperative. As far as the flight instruments go, got a QNH share of 995 set on the left, same on the right. That's giving us an aerodrome elevation of 80 feet, that's correct. HSIs 220, 220, and same there on the magnetic compass. Artificial horizons, we've got flags there for the flight directors, the glide slope and the loc. Same there on the right. And the rest of the flight instruments there looking good. Hydraulic quantities are checked. Worth noting there as well, zero pressure there on the brake. I'm not sure whether or not that's accurate. I would have thought there'd be some sort of accumulated pressure. Static source is set through to normal. The altitude selector will go with 8,000 feet. It's going to be a short run, as I say. That will keep us above the terrain for the flight. And again, no sounds associated here with the selection, which is pretty disappointing. So we have 8,000 set. Prop auto feather should be off currently according to the checklist. That switch doesn't actually seem to do all that much on the aircraft. The auto feather seems to arm automatically depending on the phase of flight. Engine intake deflectors are retracted. The engine instruments are checked. Pitch and roll disconnect handles are selected in and locked. Radar and transponder we can set up here on the Garmin G10XI. We'll just wait for the TORS test to complete.
TORS system test OK.
Initially I was planning to run without the G10XI, a little bit more true to life of the Dash 7, but I thought it would be interesting to see how the system actually integrates with the aircraft. So we'll set up a quick flight plan here on the left. We'll take the weather radar on the right, leaving that in standby for the time being. So again, we're going to be departing out of Maniitsoq. We'll track the Mike Sierra DME there, just for the data. That's the Maniitsoq DME. We'll then be tracking up north towards the Sierra DME. And again, that's for Sisimiut. And the code for Sisimiut is Bravo Golf Sierra. So very quick, straightforward flight plan. We'll just tune up the Maniitsoq DME here, so waypoint info. Frequency is 110.55. We'll set that in the active. We'll come back onto the map display for the time being. Take the DMEs on. Interesting to note, we don't seem to pick up the DME, but I'll give the aircraft the benefit of the doubt on that one. Both the SkyVector and indeed the Garmin databases are somewhat out of date. The nav aids aren't always that accurate, so it may be that they've actually been decommissioned and we're not therefore picking them up in the sim. Anyway, the comm radios are set, nav radios are set, transponder in standby, weather radar is in standby. Control lock is set, trims are set. We've got neutral there on both the aileron and the rudder trims. Flight idle gate, again, seems to be somewhat inoperative on the aircraft. It does seem to function automatically at the appropriate phase of flight. It's currently selected out. Autopilot and yaw damper are selected off. Flap selector, we have the flaps set up and the flaps indicating up. Landing gear horn, a little bit fiddly to get to from our current position, but again, whilst the switch does work, there's no sound associated with this operation. The caution and advisory lights. In terms of the warning lights, then we have engine fail and engine fire lights, as well as the mast caution. And for the caution lights, Those are checked. Again, no sounds associated with the test. That may well be true to life on the aircraft. Prop sync phase is selected off, and again, not modelled on the aircraft. Anti-skid is selected on. Roll spoiler switches are both guarded. Crew briefing not required. That is the originating checklist complete. So we are now ready for the boarding. We'll make our way briefly through the cabin, check out the modelling and texturing there, and then we'll come back for the start.
Ladies and gentlemen, in preparation for departure, please check to see that your seatbelts are securely fastened, your window shades are open, seat backs are in the upright and locked position, your tray tables have been put away, all your carry-on items are securely stowed.
Okay, so everybody is now on board the aircraft. We've got the doors closed up, running through the start checks. Seatbelt, rudder and harnesses are adjusted and secure. Start clearance has been received. As far as the takeoff data goes, we should be able to set V-speed bugs here, but those aren't modelled on the aircraft. That may just be an issue of different variants of the Dash 7 and various airline options. Anti-collision light is set on. Windows and doors. Got both cockpit windows closed up. Again, those don't seem to be operative on the aircraft. We'll close up the cockpit door here as well. Again, unfortunately, no sounds associated with that. Emergency brake is set through to park. Power levers are in the flight idle position. Condition levers are in the fuel shut-off position. That is the start checklist complete. As far as the sequence goes, I believe it's 3, 4, 2, 1 or something to that effect. That's what we'll run with here. So selecting engine number 3, we'll engage the starter. We do have start mode selected on there on the caution and warning panel. And we do have rotation there on the NG. Looks like the prop RPM and the torque coming up there as well. Interestingly, we get a spike there in fuel flow, despite having the fuel currently selected off, which I can't imagine is accurate to the aircraft. Anyway, taking the condition lever through, feeding fuel into the engine.
10 vector Troms approach, god förmiddag. RP Alpha is available.
You can see we do have a good light off. And just waiting on the engine to stabilise. I've had quite a few issues with the engine gauges. We'll talk about some of those during the flight.
10 vector clear direct, exegro, and ready to descend to flight level 9 is still.
Good start there then on the number 3. We'll start the number 4. Worth noting as well, again, I don't know if it's true to life or not of the Dash 7, but the starter remains engaged throughout the process. I would have thought there'd be some sort of cutout, but I could be wrong. So once again, condition lever can go through to the feather gate. Good light off. So good start there on the 3 and 4. We'll head outside here, the start on the number 2. And we'll come back once we have 4 good engines and we're ready for the after start checklist. Okay, so we do have 4 good starts. We'll take the Thrustmaster off, and start selector can go off there as well. DC generators can go on. Now we'll take the AC generators on the right side. External power is off, running through the after start checks. Start selector is off, lights out, DC external power has been disconnected. Battery temperatures are checked, you can see they've come now right back into the green. Engine bleeds. We'll take through to low. Again, not really much guidance here given in terms of what position we actually want them in. Emergency exit lights are armed. Flight directors will take on. And according to the checklist here, we want go around set. I would assume the go around switches are here on the throttles. That doesn't seem to have any change in operation there on the flight directors. In the meantime though, we'll take heading as well. So we'll set the heading bug. And we'll take out select. Heading. Currently in GPS there on the HSI. Course there is going to be 015, so we'll select that here ahead of time.
010 Victor, descent 5000, NH 1010, cleared RMP.
So flight directors are set, PFCS switches, again we have all lights out. Prop auto feather is selected. Engine instruments are checked. The engine intake deflectors will set through to extend. Hydraulic quantities are checked, hydraulic pressures are checked, still showing 0 there on the brake pressure. Radar will even standby, transponder will even standby for the time being. Flaps, it's going to be a flaps 15 takeoff. So we have flaps 15 selected. Flaps just rolling out. Again, no sounds that I can hear there associated with the flaps. And it may be that in reality you can't hear the flaps on the Dash 7, but nevertheless it's nice to have those sorts of sound effects, I believe, in the sim. Rudder control is checked. Worth noting there as well, no deflection there on the rudder. Here on the flight control indicator, I don't know whether or not that's true to life. We do get indications there for the roll spoilers. Autopilot is selected off, yaw damper is selected on. The ground equipment and chocks have been removed. Condition levers, again according to the checklist we want to come all the way through to the full max position here on numbers 1 and 4. We're just going to come through to normal flow for the time being. The aircraft really wants to run away from you on the ground. So 1 and 4 there in normal flow. Nose wheel steering once again is set on, the switch and operative. After start checklist is complete. For the taxi checks, we'll take the taxi light on. Flaps, once again we have flaps 15 indicated and selected. Flight instruments are checked. Takeoff briefing not required. We'll run through the lineup checks here as well. We're going to be taxiing straight here onto the runway. So condition levers can now all go through to the max flow position.
Scandinavian 4414 requesting first start.
And as I say, with all 4 levers there in the max flow position, we may sit on the taxi in at Sisimiut, but the aircraft is really going to run away during the taxi. Pitot heats are selected on. We'll do the same there for the stall warning heat, and the windshield heat can go through to normal. Some of the switching is a little bit backwards as well in terms of how you actuate it with your hardware. So windshield heat selected on, anti-collision light is set through to white. AC generators are selected on, engine bleeds are set through to low. Flight control lock is selected off, we'll check the flight controls.
4414, start is book, NH 1010.
And those are full and free. The flight taxi switch is set through to flight, transponder will set through to out. The weather radar, we'll just leave that in standby here till we're clear of the apron. Auto feather, as you can see again the switch doesn't seem to allow us to select arm, but that is selected. Landing lights are selected on. Ignition not required, we'll carry out one more test here of the caution lights. And those are checked. Cabin is ready, that is the lineup checklist complete.
Scandinavian 4414 taxi.
4414 taxi to holding point runway 36 for taxiway Alpha.
Alpha, holding point 36, Scandinavian 4414.
It is 10 Victor, taxi Charlie Yankee 1018.
Charlie,
Okay, so we now got ourselves lined up here on runway 34. We've got a nice strong headwind there as well down the runway. There is a little bit of high terrain off the departure track, and we don't have much of a break there in the weather, so we'll maintain runway heading until we're above the MSA. Holding the aircraft on the brakes initially, as it's a fairly short takeoff run. We'll start coming up on the power levers. And off the brakes, all the way through to full power here for the takeoff. You can see that the auto feather has now armed. And the Dash 7 really feels like it's on rails here during the takeoff. There's no pull from the props, even in a strong crosswind, the aircraft tracks straight down the runway. So we do have positive climb, tap the brakes, bring in the gear. I'm pitching for a climb here initially of 120 knots. Okay, so we're up through 500, speed's checked, we'll retract the flaps. And you can see the high terrain there that we discussed just off to the right of the departure track, so maintaining runway heading again for the time being.
Shade 4 kilo, QNH 1010.
Now that the flaps are retracted, obviously a bit of a reduction there in drag, so speed increasing, we can pitch up to maintain 120 knots. And we can start coming back now towards the climb power setting. We'll go for 400 foot-pounds of torque. We'll leave the props as they are. The aircraft does get very disturbed by bringing the props back, and I've not found a decent way of bringing them all back at once, so better to have the aircraft either trimmed out and stable, or better yet with the autopilot in before we do that. Just coming up through 2,000 feet. A little bit of a break here in the weather. More or less trimmed out here now for 120 knots. So we'll take the autopilot. We'll come into IAS holds and come back into heading. The autopilot mode seems to drop out there when you take the autopilot in, which is a bit strange. We'll just arm up the altitude there as well, make sure that we do capture. So we've got just below 400 foot-pounds of torque there on the engines. You can see all of the engine parameters more or less reading exactly the same. The T5 temperatures are slightly different there, to be fair. There's not much nuance, I think it's fair to say, from the engine modelling. So we'll start coming back on the props. We'll just do that a little bit at a time on each engine. Again, you can see there the aircraft really starts to move around as you do so. We'll come back towards around 1,000 RPM.
4414 by either taxi Bravo or Alpha, line up runway 36 via lane taxi and the runway.
At least looking at the gauge, I assume that's 1,000 RPM. That sounds awfully slow.
Line up 36 via taxiway and runway scanner 4414.
And again, no real detail given in the manual in terms of engine power settings for various phases of flights. We'll just bring the props back here to kill off some of the noise, keep things a little bit quieter down the back for the passengers. Looks like we're getting a little bit high there as well on our T5, so we'll come back off the power. We'll go around 750 degrees here in the climb, and we'll bring that back to around 650 in the cruise. Those are power settings that I find tend to work reasonably well. It's up through 5,000 feet for the after takeoff checks. Landing gear is up, lights are out, flaps are up. Prop auto feather is selected off. Climb power is set, synchro phase. Once again, unfortunately the switch is inoperative. The flight idle gate, as you can see, that automatically has now been set to the in position. Taxi light is selected off. Ignition not required. Intake deflectors are retracted. Cabin pressure control. So currently showing a differential pressure there of around 1.2 psi. Cabin altitude there of around 2,500 feet. We're not going to pay too much attention to the system here today, as again, seems to be a few bugs in terms of setting the correct parameters. We're showing a cabin vertical speed there of around plus 500 feet per minute. For the radio altimeter, that's checked. We'll set 200 feet here for the DH. A little bit ahead of time for the arrival later on in towards Sisimiut. Fasten seatbelt signs, we'll just leave on a little bit longer here until we get above most of this weather. It actually looks as though we are above the first cloud layer now, and we'll probably be sitting between the two here for the flight. So we'll just cycle the signs for now. And that is the after takeoff checklist complete. 1,000 to go. Happy that we are now clear of the terrain, so we'll turn back onto our flight plan course. We'll come to a heading of around 050 to intercept. And currently showing about 5 miles left of track.
Crazy, it's 24, roger. So long.
So again, turning back over towards the high terrain now, 8,000 feet is going to keep us above the terrain throughout the flight. And as before, still not picking up any DME there on the DME indicator. Interestingly, not showing a DME there based off the GPS flight plan either. Just approaching 8,000, does look as though we're going to capture. So bar the autopilot modes, they're dropping out as you engage the autopilot. Overall, I found the autopilot does do a reasonable job. Leveling off at 8,000, we'll let the aircraft accelerate. So again, we're going to come back to around 650 here on the RTTs. Here for the cruise.
Last station, calling Tromsø approach, unreadable.
We'll leave the props as they are. So we've got about 650 there across the board. Again, I find that's a pretty reasonable cruise power setting overall. And that's us, nicely established here now in the cruise. We'll take the seatbelt signs off, let the passengers up and around. Only around 20 minutes here in the cruise, sitting just on tops of the clouds. Bit of a gloomy day today, so we're not going to see all that much en route, but we'll head outside. We'll take another look at the external model of the aircraft now that we're in flight. 8,000 feet, so we need around 24 miles here for the descent. So we'll come back just before we hit that 24-mile mark before Sisimiut. We can commence the descent. It's just going to be a visual arrival, so we'll descend down initially again towards the MSA, which is 3,000 feet. We'll have to find a break in the clouds, and once we find that, we can descend inbound towards the airfield.
Crazy Horse 24 and second, POB. Crazy Horse 24, roger. Clear to leave controls on BFR to the north, 2,500 feet or below, and same scope 2610. Crazy Horse 24, air taxi to holding point Echo for runway 36.
Tower, Scandinavia 4414, stand 16 with information Juliet, request clearance.
4414, Tromsø, good afternoon. Cleared to Longyear, Lombi 7 Alpha departure, climb to flight level 90, squawk 0414.
Lombi 7 Alpha, flight level 90, squawk 0414, Scandinavia 4414.
Scandinavia 4414, contact port 123.75, goodbye.
Approach 123.75, Scandinavia 4414, bye. Approach Scandinavia 4414, 3,000 feet climbing, flight level 90 on Lombi 7 Alpha.
Scandinavia 4414, Tromsø approach, identified, climb via SID to flight level 18. I'm passing 5,000 feet, clear direct. Crazy Horse 24, roger, and yeah, there's a restriction area on the eastern side of the nearest fjord, so if you cross directly over from the airfield and then follow along the shoreline, should take you clear of that area. Wind is 030 degrees 7 knots, runway 36, clear for takeoff.
Okay, so welcome back to the flight deck. We are just approaching our top descent point. We've got around 25 miles to run. Again, we're initially going to be descending down towards 3,000 feet. That will keep us clear of the terrain until we're visual with the airfield. So we have out pre-selected at 3,000. We'll come into vertical speed. We'll go with a descent rate here of BS minus 1,000. Interesting to note here as well, the trim wheel seems to be visually modelled in the incorrect sense. So again, quite a few scrappy little bugs with the aircraft, I think it is fair to say.
Clement 4414, wind 030 degrees, 9 knots, runway 36, cleared for takeoff.
They're turning back onto a northeasterly heading. And we'll come back to around 550 here on the T5s. That seems to be a pretty good power setting here during the descent. That'll keep us just below VMO. We'll come back into nav. We just had a little bit of heading deviation earlier on to avoid some weather.
36, left takeoff, scanner 4414.
So down through 7,000. As far as the arrival goes then, as you can see, currently tracking in from the south. As I say, we'll descend down to 3,000 feet initially. Once we find a break in the weather, we'll descend down further once we're visual with the field. Ideally here, if we're visual early enough, we'll break off for a bit of a left-hand base in for runway 32. We know the wind's out from the northwest. Otherwise though, we might have to make a little bit of an orbit in the bay for a left-hand downwind if we become visual with the field a little bit later on. So again, planning on landing 3-2, we'll use manual braking. We'll go with full reverse here as well, try and keep the brake temperatures down, given that we're flying a number of short, sharp, quick sectors here today. In terms of our fuel, just down to around £4,000 or just below now on the aircraft. In terms of our fuel burn, about £500 an hour on each engine, so we've got just shy of 2 hours of fuel on board the aircraft. That gives us plenty of options. We could actually return back towards Maniitsoq with that sort of fuel. Otherwise though, there are a few other airfields available in the area.
Gremlin 4414, contact port 123.75, goodbye.
So down through 6,000, another 3,000 foot to go here in the descent. And showing about 15 miles to run.
Approach 12375, scanner 4414, bye.
So we are just slightly high now here in terms of the profile, but there's not really much point increasing that descent rate until we're below the weather and visual. Just coming down through the cloud layer, we'll take the elevator heat on. Same there as well for the prop heats. We'll leave the airframe de-ice off for now, we'll just keep a good eye on things. Doesn't look as though we're picking up any ice here as we come down through the cloud layer. And approaching 5,000 feet, we'll take the seatbelt signs back on. For the approach checks, the cabin differential control is checked, engine bleeds are set through to low. Fasten seatbelt signs are on, landing lights are selected on. The rudder, we have 200 foot there selected for the decision height. And that is the approach checklist complete. So down through 5,000, just coming through the tops of the clouds. We are visual there out towards the east. So it might be worth here coming back onto a heading. Come to a heading of around 030. Hopefully we'll break out through the clouds out towards the northeast.
Approach Scandinavian 4414, 3,000 feet climbing flight level 90 on Lombi 7 Alpha.
Still good there on the speed. We'll come up on the props again a little bit early. Again, it's quite tricky to do that manually and fly the aircraft at the same time. So we're just coming down the eastern edge of the bay here at the moment. Unfortunately, it does look as though we've got a little bit of weather between us here in the airfield. We'll come up on the props now, save us doing that later on.
4414, Tromsø approach, identify climb via SID to flight level 18. I'm passing 5,000 feet, clear direct bay.
And we are now visual. I'm happy we can continue the descent, so we'll come down to 1,000 feet. And you can see there the beacon light at the field, so we are now visual. We'll take out the autopilot.
4414, say again.
So that has been disconnected, and we'll come back off the power levers again. Continuing the descent, we can start slowing up here now as well for the approach. We'll just come into conventional nav. We'll set the course bar for the runway course. Just used as a visual aid. Says 3-2. We'll start letting that speed reduce. We can take flaps 15 below 140 knots, flaps 25 below 120. As far as the landing checks go, the synchrophaser, again inoperative, currently selected off. Engine intake deflectors are set through to extended. Taxi light is selected on. Condition levers are set through to max RPM. So just the gear and the flaps to come, and we'll hold those for the time being. Coming all the way back now on the power.
Meteors 25, Tromsø approach.
So I'm sure you can make out the beacon light, the runway just out towards the southwest of that. Not quite visual with the runway yet myself, but I can see certainly where it's situated. Just to help a little bit with that speed reduction, we'll take the gear down.
Press yours to 4, Roger, no reported traffic below Tromsø TMA.
So we do have gear down 3 greens, just approaching 140 knots. As soon as you take that gear, getting a much higher rate of descent. So speed's checked, we'll take flaps 15. Planning on a flaps 25 landing today. We don't need all of the drag associated with flaps 45, we've got plenty of runway. Down below 140, there's flaps 25. 4 whites on the Pappy currently. And continuing to let that speed reduce back towards 100 knots. Down through 1,000 feet. So just coming around onto final, we've got a little bit of weather just out towards the west of the field. So speed's good, a little bit high but correcting for that. Just coming back onto the Pappy as you can see.
Scandinavian 4414, contact Polaris 126.7.
The aircraft does perhaps feel like it wants to be slightly nose high here to maintain the vertical speed during the descent.
167, Scandinavian 4414.
500.
Let's check to 500. Just get ourselves established here on the centre line. Fairly strong crosswind out from the right here currently. That seems to be bleeding off as we continue the descent. Okay, nicely established now on the centre line. Again, a little bit high, we can correct for that. Now, we're not going to focus too much here on the Pappy. They never tend to be all that accurate in the sim, just focusing on that touchdown zone. Again, I would say the aircraft just feels a little bit nose high. Could just be me, there's touchdown. The aircraft feels pretty vague there as well during the touchdown, to be honest. Felt as though we bounced, but I don't think we did. I think that clicking noise you can hear is the ground idle gate on the props. Actually having a little bit of trouble there selecting full beta. Anyway, getting the aircraft stopped before the end of the runway, we'll backtrack, get ourselves turned around and head in towards the apron. Okay, so backtracking the runway now, just approaching the parking area, running through the aft lane checks. The control lock is selected on, condition levers. We'll bring the number 2 and the number 3 back toward the feather detent. Just using the 1 and 4. And again, even with those prop levers all the way back on the number 2 and 3, the aircraft will really run away on you during the taxi. So in towards the apron, the anti-collision light is set through to red. We'll take the landing lights off. Flaps can come up. Weather radar is in standby. Transponder is set through to standby. We'll just hold the checklist there until we've got the aircraft turned around.
Initiate for Kilo from approach. When ready to descend, flight level 110. After lockout, descend according to star QNH 1010. KLILS runway.
Even during the turn there, the aircraft really wanting to run away during the taxi. Onto the brakes, we'll set the park brake, and we'll bring the rest of the condition levers here back to the feather position. Okay, so for the rest of the offline checklist, anti-collision light is set, AC generators are off. Ignition is off, pitot and static heats are selected off. We'll take the stall warning heat off there as well. Same for the prop, de-ice and the elevator heater. Flight taxi switch is set through to taxi. Your damper is selected off. Landing lights are off. Radar and transponder are selected off. That is the afterlane check is complete. And for the shutdown, the emergency brake is set through to park. Taxi light is off. Power levers are at flight idle. Condition levers have been in the feather position for 30 seconds. Engine bleeds are off. Fasten seatbelt signs. We'll leave on until we've got the engine shut down. Emergency exit lights go off. Radar is off. DMEs are selected off. Noticeable steering once again inoperative. Condition levers, we'll cut those one at a time. So good cut there on the number 1. Same there on the number 2. Number 3. And number 4. Anti-collision light is off. We'll leave the position light on. Panel lighting is set as required. DC external power is selected on. Left and right batteries are selected off. We'll leave the battery, AC and DC masters on. Anti-skid switch is selected off. And that is the shutdown checklist complete here on the ground in Sisimiut. So there you go, ladies and gents. I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Pilot's Dash 7. Whilst I did enjoy the flight, and Greenland is certainly an excellent location within the sim, not one that I've really flown in before, but certainly worth exploring further, the aircraft itself was, I have to say, a little bit of an anti-climax overall. Again, I was really looking forward to the Dash 7 in the sim. I think many of us were. Given the tie-in with SimWorks Studios, I know that many of us were hoping for a Dash 7 done to the same levels as the Kodiak, and clearly, unfortunately, that isn't the case with this particular product. As usual, I'll try and break things down into a little bit more detail, give you my thoughts on the various aspects of the Dash 7. So, starting with the modelling, externally the aircraft looks pretty decent, internally, again, fairly decent, although I do think the cockpit doesn't quite look true to life of the real-world aircraft. Much of that may come down to texturing, which we'll cover in just a moment's time, but to my mind the cockpit does tend to look a little bit flat. As well, some of the detailing looks inaccurate. For example, the pillars on the windshield there look a little bit thin. Somehow the modelling in the Pilot's Dash 7 just doesn't look as solid as its real-world counterpart. Certainly, as I say, the texturing probably comes into play quite a bit there. You do get a decent selection of liveries with the aircraft, and externally the texturing is acceptable. The liveries though are pretty much factory fresh, which doesn't really feel right for an aircraft of this vintage, an aircraft that generally works so hard out in the real world. And the weathering that is there tends to be a little bit basic, a little bit overdone. Hopefully we'll see some of that negated with third-party repaints. I'm planning on creating a couple of my own, in fact. Internally, again, unfortunately the texturing isn't particularly great. It does look rather dated. As I say, quite a lot of the textures look fairly flat and do rather lack definition versus the real-world cockpit. As far as the aircraft systems modelling goes, again, fairly underwhelming, it has to be said. It is worth noting though, and it's certainly fair to consider, that this is a €20 add-on, so we're not necessarily expecting a full study-level Dash 7 experience. That being said, the aircraft is on sale at the moment. It will ultimately be retailing at €25. With regards to the systems, most switches were clickable. We were able to action most items on the real-world checklist. But as you saw, there were also quite a few switches that were inoperative, and similarly, quite a lot of the systems felt fairly basic in their implementation. It certainly didn't feel as though there was a whole lot of systems modelling going on behind the scenes. But again, do bear in mind this is a €20-25 add-on. The flight model of the aircraft, again, fairly mid-range. The aircraft felt absolutely nailed to the centerline during the takeoff, which was interesting. Even in high crosswind conditions, the same behaviour was prevalent. Really unusual for Microsoft Flight Simulator in particular. Things felt reasonable during the rotation. The aircraft was fairly pleasant to hand fly thereafter. My main gripe with the flight model would be how the aircraft felt during the approach. Again, it felt quite nose heavy, a little bit unnatural there during the approach. And similarly, on the touchdown, really no feedback there. It felt as though we bounced the aircraft. It was quite hard to judge, firstly, when we actually touched down. In terms of performance numbers, the aircraft felt reasonably appropriate. Certainly way overpowered during the taxi. The aircraft will run away from you at any given opportunity. Conversely, I did wonder whether or not the aircraft wasn't just a touch lethargic during the takeoff roll. Otherwise though, the Dash 7 seemed to perform pretty reasonably. You can certainly get off and onto some fairly short runways, and the aircraft is not much of a performer when it comes to climb rates and overall speed. As far as the sounds go, again I think unfortunately a missed opportunity here from pilots. That is, unless there are some significant updates planned to the aircraft sounds at a later date. As I understand it, the developer actually had access to a real-world Dash 7, hence why I say it's a bit of a missed opportunity. With the Dash 7, currently there are a lot of sounds still missing in the cockpit, and the engine sounds are okay internally, not particularly great externally. There's a few peculiar sounds and soundset glitches as well. I'm really hoping that pilots manage to get a lot of recorded material from the real-world aircraft, and that we'll see an improved soundset at a later date. To my mind, if we saw some significant improvements to both the sounds and the texturing, that would really help to bring the pilot's Dash 7 to life. As far as additional features go, again, unfortunately the product is pretty thin on the ground. No external ground equipment, so no chocks, no covers. Not a big deal in and of itself, but pretty standard for any product in the sim these days. Similarly, no tablet, so no configurable options on the aircraft. It is nice though that we get GTN-XI integration. I gather that PMS GTN 750 integration is planned at a later date. One option that we didn't cover here in the video, you can also integrate the GNS 530 into the aircraft. And similarly, as far as the manual goes, the documentation is very bare bones. A real shame, as that was one of the fortes of pilots Boeing 314, lots of nice historical documentation regarding the Clipper. As far as the aircraft's FPS goes, it's also quite a hungry product. I was getting about 73 FPS in the Dash 7 versus around 120 in the default Cessna 152. All in all then, the pilot's Dash 7 is okay given the price point. I was really looking forward to and hoping for an in-depth, immersive Dash 7 experience within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Unfortunately, this aircraft isn't that just yet, although it is worth noting that pilots did put out plenty of updates for their Boeing 314 once the aircraft released, so hopefully they'll continue to do the same here with the Dash 7. I never enjoy denigrating a product. I am always conscious that there are people, and indeed potentially their livelihoods, behind the scenes of these add-ons. As I say, I was really looking forward to the Dash 7, but until the aircraft has seen quite a bit of work, I don't really see myself returning to it all that often. Anyway guys, I do hope you found the video to be of use. If you did, then please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. If you'd like to help support the channel further, gain early access to some video content, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. To all of you, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.